Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartsheimer.
We are Spark Partners. We're here every week to talk to you about trends and how to use them to grow your business. One of the trends we talk about a lot and is one that is not always discussed in the greater media, and that is, of course, demographics. This is how people are living, where they're living, their ages, where they are in the whole continuum of their work lifestyle, how they work, all these things. And one of these has to do with the generation that is called Generation Z, also called the Zoomers. And these are the folks that were born in the late 90s, early 2000s, and are essentially entering the workforce at the very early stages now. And, you know, in what I do and what you do, Adam, we're working with folks of this age group. And I think it's important for our listeners and our audience to really recognize that the way that they operate, that the way that they work is going to be different. And I think oftentimes people that are in positions of leadership are typically older, whether they're Gen X like myself, or sorry to say, a boomer like yourself. And I say sorry to say because there's a certain slant in some of these younger generations to talk badly about the older generations, which has, of course, been happening since the beginning of time. But give me your thoughts on what's happening with the Gen Z and how it's important for us to adjust our way of being to take full advantage of how they are.
Well, we get asked a lot about how we make our trend predictions. And one of the things that we did back 3 years ago, you remember we wrote our book about Thrive to the Future, and we picked out the 4 big trends that were going to make a big difference. And we keyed it on the pandemic at the time, but the reality was these trends were already there. They were expected. They were going to grow, and the pandemic just accelerated them. And they were, of course, being mobile, operating asynchronously, working in a gig economy, and using artificial intelligence. Well, a big part of what births those kinds of predictions is understanding the demographics in the population and how people are changing in the workforce. What's going on, and boomers still have this very outsized voice in politics. There's just no doubt about it. Every time you turn on any kind of a news program that talks about politics, you'll hear about how the boomers are traditionally and significantly more Republican. The people that are on the far right of the stage, almost all are boomers to a drastic extent. And then we see the people more to the left tend to be younger people, right? And but when we come to the workplace, it's a different story because a lot of boomers are retired. I mean, we're to the point where the end of the boomers is coming up pretty quick here, and they're already 60. The youngest boomers are already 63, 64 years old, the very youngest ones. And, we're moving to your generation, the Gen X generation, or the leaders. In some ways, I think it's unfortunate that we have a lot of boomers that can't seem to find their way out the door. It seems like an awful lot of our politicians need to be replaced, to be quite honest. And I don't think they're that effective, and I don't think they're up to date in a lot of ways. But the same thing's happening in corporate America. I mean, Jamie Dimon's running J.P. Morgan Chase. He's 67 years old. And, he makes decrees like, I want everybody to come into the office. And he talks in this very strident way about he's got the answers. And, head of the U.S. largest bank, I guess he gets away with that. But the reality is that a lot of people don't like the way that he talks, don't like the ideas that he has for how to manage a workforce, because it is very, very boomer-oriented. Today, and I'm not making light of Gen Xers, but I just ran some numbers recently and was looking at it, and it kind of surprised myself in that Millennials and Gen Xers already represent 50% of the workforce. Already. And as boomers retire, it's going to move up. The Gen Xers, you guys are going to be in the period, be the CEOs and the chair people and running these companies. And the top managers, your senior directors, vice presidents, are going to be the millennials. And the managers are going to be the Zoomers. In 2025, 25% of our workforce will be Zoomers, right? And so it's just 2 years away, right? It's just a couple of years out there. And so this is an issue where we can take the demographics and we can start to say, okay, let's get very practical about this. What does it mean? And it means that instead of making decisions, if you're an older Gen Xer or if you're a younger boomer still in business, you need to be thinking about what is it that's going to motivate the people who work for me? What is going to inspire their willingness to work hard, be industrious. What do I have to do to maintain retention, keep them in my company? And in very, very real ways, it's not what the boomers did. Not what the boomers did. So just to make sure we kick it off to help our audience out here, the millennials are today aged about 27 to 42. So it's born between 1981 and 1996. And the Zoomers are those aged 26 and younger in the workforce, obviously born 1997 and later. And kind of want to make sure that the people out there knew how I'd use the definition. I also wanted to, as we talk about this, some of the key highlights. I surveyed, I overviewed surveys of both millennials and Zoomers from Deloitte and Touche, Handshake, Computer World, Great Place to Work, Gallup, and CNBC. So this isn't just like one piece of data. It was looking across and saying what trends among these workforces do all of these surveys agree to? And now we can kick out any isolators. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about, to get to where we're talking about the Zoomers, I want to talk about the millennials. And I say that because, again, they're already becoming vice presidents in companies. They're already becoming successful CEOs of entrepreneurial organizations. In some cases, they're already CEOs of larger organizations, right? And so I want to kind of talk a bit about how different millennials are from the boomer generation. So
Okay.
some of the highlights is, for example, the number one thing across the surveys was that millennials wanted to be sure they worked for a company with a clear mission, that they saw business as a source of powerful and positive social impact. They thought that every company should have ethical leaders and a clear statement of the reason this company existed. And I think back, I went to business school and they taught me businesses existed to make money. I mean, that was about it, right? I mean, you could abuse employees, you could abuse suppliers. Well, they were just tactics that were in the mission of making money. And then here, the first thing is, hey, it doesn't come up like the number one thing for me is money. It comes up that these issues about clear mission and ethics. Does that ring with you, Manny, and some of the experiences you've had?
Well, yes and no. So my generation, we grew up with the Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
All those movies that had to do with what was happening, and there was a tremendous amount of wealth being accumulated as we were growing up. And so for us, and I'm speaking for me at this point, is it was a place to make lots of money. How could you actually take advantage of where you work to make lots of money? The idea of the social good or doing good was second, third, fourth, and at least my list. I mean, I was going to work for somebody who was ethical, obviously, but for me, it's about being successful and making my mark in this world. But I've worked with millennials, and I've been actually challenged by them with that exact statement. Are we doing good? Are we doing good in what we're doing, or is it just this idea of corporate greed was kind of was frowned upon? And I grew up with the exact opposite mentality of these businesses can make lots of money, and with that money, you can do lots of good. Sort of, it followed the making the money part.
Yeah, when I got out of business school in the 80s, Wall Street, the movie Wall Street was made by Oliver Stone. And there's that famous line in it where the investment banker says, greed is good. That greed is what makes everything work in the world. Chasing money causes people to do good things, and greed is good. And one of the top, very top, maybe it was the very top comedy on television was called Family Ties. And an actor, Michael J. Fox, was in there, and he was the lead, and he played this young man who was in a family that had let's call it a liberal or neoliberal slant to the family, and he was very much as sort of Reagan-esque. I want to be a businessman. I want to go to Princeton, and I want to be a businessman down the road. And it established that the main character of the show, the hero of the show, was somebody who was very much into making money. So it just kind of like you think about that and you think, would that kind of a movie play well today? It wouldn't, right?
No, it
No,
wouldn't. No.
it wouldn't. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. But what I would say to our audience out there is, do you establish your leadership as ethical? Are you saying, what your mission is of your company, how you're helping the world, and before you get to how you make money, right?
Yeah.
You and I talk about, do you have a value proposition and do you have a value delivery system, right? We were very much all taught on how to build a value delivery system as money making enterprise, and our value proposition is usually around what's the thing that the customer really wants that we can charge them for, right? So we can get the value out of it. But it's a step beyond that to say, well, we're here because we're cleaning up the planet, or we're here because we're lengthening the average lifespan of the humans, or we're coming up with healthier food for the planet, or those kinds of phrases. That was not something my generation did. It would have been considered a waste of time to go to have a meeting like that. But yet, if this is the number one thing that millennial leaders are looking for, then I think the Gen X leaders and some of the youngest boomers that are out there better start thinking about how to do that, right? You better have that clear mission out there. The second thing was they wanted a collaborative and innovative culture. And in fact, this one got nailed down in a couple of surveys but they would give up pay to be in a collaborative and innovative culture. Again, that was not the way boomers thought, right? So, what is a collaborative and innovative culture, and how do you create one? Becomes kind of an interesting question, right?
Yeah, it does.
Have
Yeah, I
you
think
have you had any experiences out there you can think about where you've seen companies and you said, "Well, that's a collaborative and innovative company"?
I have, but it was again secondary or third or fourth down the road as a, like, do I want to do business with them because they provide me the value that I'm looking for is number one.
Yep.
And having managed, so I've managed. When I got out of college, I actually managed someone who was deep in the boomers. He was actually a Vietnam vet. He worked in this lab, and he was very much right wing, very union kind of mentality. And he actually schooled me a number of times. But what it taught me is it taught me to recognize that how I managed him and how I managed others in my team was all about how they expected to be managed. So again, he was deep in the boomers. I think must be, if he's still alive, it must be in his mid to late 70s by now, maybe even older. And so I just had to work with him differently because here I am, this young kid, his manager, and it was difficult. It was difficult at first.
Well, when I think about collaborative and innovative, I graduated from the Harvard Business School in 1982, and people would say, "Hey, you want to go to the Harvard Business School? You make all these great friends with people, and you'll help each other in your career as it goes forward." I can tell you that's not what happened. That was it probably does happen today, but to be honest, back in those days, there was much more competition. I mean, the whole system was driven around the 10% of every class got told you don't get to come back. It was very intense competition to be at the top, very intense competition to get jobs. Like, did you get placed in an investment bank or management consulting company? They're very competitive, and people didn't share much. And once you got into the workforce, it was like, how do I take care of myself? Not how do I try to collaborate with my colleagues and try to do things together. There wasn't much of that. I can honestly say that of the 70 people that I had in my section at the Harvard Business School, there's maybe two or three that I talk to more than once a year. And I interact with them probably half dozen to a dozen times a year. And then there's a set that I probably have one interaction a year with. And then there's probably half the class that I don't even have any interactions with on a regular basis at all. So, and that's because we really weren't taught to be collaborative. We were taught to get in there and be competitive. And the guy who's going to, I see my bias there, the person that's going to make it to the top is the one in a dog eat dog corporate world. You might just have to shoot one other VP in the back, metaphorically shoot them in the back in order to get promoted into that next level job if you want to try to make it to the top. So your colleagues were not treated as people that were collaborative, and you weren't trying to be innovative. You were trying to sort of assassinate your way to the top of an organization in many ways. So that means we're looking at a very significant change in terms of how people work, and pushing people to share, pushing people to exchange ideas and to give each other credit, and expecting that would make the organization better. And the important thing is that if people can't lead that way, then they're not going to be able to keep the good quality among the millennials. They wanted management to be very committed to the employee's success. And I got to thinking about this, and I did more deep research on it. And what they're looking for is they want training programs in the company again. Years ago, companies had training programs, and they did away with all of it. It's up to you to go get an MBA or whatever if you want to get trained, get certified. You do that on your own time, right? But they want training. They want clear and reasonable goals, right? And they want to be able to have access to all the information And you're probably familiar. I mean, I grew up in a world in which information was valuable, and you didn't tell anybody something unless they had to know, not because it was confidential, but because that piece of information you have, if they don't have, could maybe accelerate your career. So you hid information from other people, right? And leaders need to be visibly, demonstrably vested in employee success. In other words, are you demonstrating to people you want them to be successful? Are you showing them you want them to be successful? And are you mentoring them? Are you truly mentoring them and helping them to get ahead? This is something that got lost. I think this did exist back in the 60s and 70s. There was a lot of mentoring. But again, as the world shifted, the boomers moved on, and we were kind of coming up. Then what happened was it went the opposite direction. It's up to you as an individual to be very competitive and fight your way to the top. And there was this a lot of reference during my working career to military things. They would try to compare business to the art of war, and I'm kind of like, boy, I've never been in war, but I've certainly seen it on television, and business is nothing like that. Right? The odds that I'm going to have somebody put a bullet in my forehead every day is very, very low. War is a very different situation, but that whole way of talking like that business is war is something that creates a defensive organization where there's not any sharing, where people, it's not about trying to help your employees below you get ahead. It's not about trying to have the whole organization get smarter and do better as things go along. The cultures weren't built that way back then, but they need to be built this way now. I want you to notice we've gone through the top three, and I haven't even talked about pay.
Yeah.
But it is very different, than maybe a lot of things we were used to. Now, here's the one I love. The fourth one is a flexible schedule and remote work. That the millennials believe very strongly that working remotely is a very powerful thing. They believe in 4-day work weeks. They believe in cooperation, um, um, across asynchronous. That's what I'm trying to get to. Yeah, asynchronous communication and collaboration asynchronously that can be very healthy. So this whole idea of being very flexible, and that ties back into our, so we're starting to those big themes, that you and I talked about: mobile, asynchronous, gig economy, AI. You were seeing how those are going to continue to be the big themes because of where people are going. Now, and this is one of the biggest ones that hits me, and this gets me back to that Jamie Dimon, J.P. Morgan comment.
Mhm.
The only people that think we need to push everyone back in their office are baby boomers.
Yeah.
I don't think the Gen X believes that either. Do you?
No, not at all.
Yeah. And I think it's again because we do realize that if you think about often your schoolwork, there was a piece of schoolwork where you worked together with other people, but at the end of the day, you had to take a test, so you had to do some studying on your own, and you had to improve your own competency. But the reality was is that when did you do that studying? Well, some people I knew in my life like to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They're very bright, fresh, and early in the morning, and enjoyed getting it. I was never like that. I always did most of my studying late in the evening. Like start at 9, 10 o'clock. I would often do readings and outlines and preparations between 9 and 1 a.m. Because that was when I liked to do it. It fit my schedule that way. So this idea of flexibility in the workforce is something that I think is coming along. It got accelerated in the pandemic, but there seems to be a lot of people that aren't very happy about it.
Yeah.
What's your sense?
Yeah, there's some tension there. I mean, some of these people, they just don't want to. They want to just keep things the way they are now, and having to go back to the office, having to reframe their work modality is just it's causing tension. I think that some there's a great, I don't know if you've heard of this idea of a generational theory. There's a book that was written, actually it was associated with HBR, and they talked about four major generational types, archetypes that repeat, and they've repeated ever since the mid 1700s, basically, to today. And there was kind of a lull during the Civil War, but I'll read them out to you here. There are prophets, nomads, heroes, and artists. And prophets are currently baby boomers, so they grew up according to this, they grew up as an indulged children during a first of turning high. So some, of course, this is after the war. They liberated themselves during an awakening period. There was a strong moral conviction. and they tend to be sort of rigid in some of their thinking. The nomads is currently Gen X, so they grew up during a time of the awakening. They see moral convictions and individual liberation as hysteria, so very individualistic, which is indicative of my generation, the Gen X. They're very self-sufficient and skeptical as young adults, and they are pragmatic midlife leaders. And so I'll read off the last two here. The heroes are the currently millennials. So they're born during an unraveling. They are protected as children and grew up during a period of high individualization. So people that, if I think about the millennials I know, this is a whole generation of getting a trophy for just participating, right? I didn't have that when I was growing up. And so heroes come of age as a community, and so they tend to think in this sort of community framework. And as they age into hubris midlife leaders, they're going to challenge the elders during this new awakening. And then the last ones are the artists, as it's called, currently Gen Z. And they say they grew up during a crisis. They are overprotected as children as well, and they view the world as chaotic. Artists come from or come of age as responsible young adults of a post-crisis high, and in midlife and old age, they become empathetic mediators during an awakening and unraveling. So it's an interesting book. It's called Generations, and there's a bunch of stuff online. You can look it up, but it repeats, every 15, 20, 25 years. And it's very interesting to look at that as it pertains to demographics.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. The last one I want to bring up here is it kind of goes on with the not with the work, the flexible scheduling is they want their health and work life integration to be better along with the scheduling. But then it's ESG, that environmental, social governance piece that we've been talking about for the last 18 months. It's really important, and that goes right back to the very first one of ethics and mission. It's that ESG, environment and social, is important, and they want to be able to talk about it, and they don't want their companies to be polluters. They want them to do good and do good things. So, given that makes me first of all of this makes me feel good. I think the Gen Xers are going to do a better job than the Boomers, and I think the Millennials are probably going to be some really great leaders as well. And I'm excited about that because they have a different approach. One of the phrases I used to use a long time ago was constituencies. And I used to say that a business has as its constituencies, its customers, its shareholders, it has shareholders, okay, or owners. But it also has customers, and it has suppliers, and it has employees, and it has the community in which it operates. And that could be a physical community, or it could be an online community. And really successful businesses do something for all of their constituents. Whereas, a lot of the training back in the 80s and in the boomer generation was, in the 70s and 80s was about one constituency, and that was the shareholder. Putting money into the owner's pocket, which of course today we have this wide gap between the very wealthy people, and everybody else. And that I think is changing. People are saying, wait a minute, there are other constituencies. And if you don't look for health among your suppliers, your employees, the community, then then this whole capitalistic system isn't going to work right. You can't just run around saying greed is good and try to be greedy and hope that everything's going to turn out okay. It's probably not. And, right now we got a lot of reasons to be skeptical. But now I want to quickly turn to the Zoomers, which I think is really interesting because it's almost like where the millennials are, but with more, but with a couple of changes. One of them is pay is much more important to the Zoomers, and there could be a lot of reasons for that, but it probably has a lot to do with student debt. And we have the most indebted people come out of college we've ever seen, and way beyond anything that I could have ever imagined in my lifetime. And so they really do care about pay, and they say, "Look, you're going to pay me what I'm worth, or I'm not going to work." And I think that takes a lot of guts. But hey, they're willing to defer getting married. They're willing to defer having children, starting families. If you're willing to defer that timeline, then you stick to your guns. You say, look, pay me what I'm worth. And I think that's actually healthy because it also ties to things like pay transparency. They want equal pay. And they say, how do I know I'm being paid fairly unless I know what he's paid and I know what she's paid? And for a woman or a person of color, they should be very, like, how do I know I'm being paid fairly? Or is the white person or is the man getting paid more money? So they very care about pay, how much they're paid, and pay transparency. They expect to have cost of living adjustments. Hey, if you want me to live in Silicon Valley, you have to pay me more than if I'm living in Fresno, California, right? They expect that to be fair. They expect fairness in pay, and they want that to be to allow that to then work for remote work, where they say, look, if you'll let me work in Fresno or work in Tucson, which is a lower cost of living than having to be in a place like Los Angeles or San Francisco, I will take a lower pay. But I want it to be transparent. I want to be able to see what people are being paid. I think this is just crazy healthy. I can remember back, 40 years ago, there was a TV show called Lou Grant about a newspaper operation, and one of the top reporters was doing an article, and he got a hold of the pay for everybody that worked in the newspaper. And the whole show was about everybody was going nuts because this guy had to pay information, and nobody wanted it. None of the leadership wanted it shared. And at the end of the day, he said, I'm a reporter. I report on what's going on. You asked me to look into this. Boom. And he posts up the pay onto the billboard, onto the board in the office that had the thumbtacks in it. Nobody has those anymore. But he posts it up on the wall, and everybody can go see what everyone else is being paid. And it was a tremendous show because it got people to thinking, how do we know if we're being paid fairly? And the Zoomers, that's one of their number one issues. And I tie it to fairness, thoughts of equality, and how people are being treated. Are we being treated properly? The second one is clarity on their career path and internal mobility. And get this, they expect to be promoted every 6 to 18 months. They expect a promotion every 6 to 18 months. There should be clear developmental opportunities for them. They want to have a sense of ownership. So if they don't get it from you, they're going to be a gig worker because they're going to get a sense of ownership, a sense of, oh, I'm in this to get for the results that come out of it. And they expect to have a mentor guide them through the process. So these are all things that I think we can sit down and start saying, hey, are we moving down the road towards these? I know there's going to be some people listening to this podcast that are going to say, gee, I can't imagine making everybody's pay. No. Well, but think about it. We do this in government. If you work in the federal government, you know the pay brackets for every single person. State governments have to publish their pay brackets. The military publishes their pay brackets. There are all kinds of places where we do publish pay transparency, and we tend to see that creates a better dynamic in the organization because people aren't fighting and arguing and wondering about it. So I think these are all very healthy, and we could do this. As leaders, we could start to set the pace, and we can, from the boomers to the Gen Xers, and try to help the millennials out with their issues by also helping the Zoomers by going out this, down this road of making sure that we are clear about your pay and clear about what you can expect to get done.
And I think that's very different than it was 15 years ago. There was an email that went out. I was at a company, and it wasn't our company. It was a sister company that had sent out this email. I think it was about 2009, maybe 8 actually. And the VP sent out a PowerPoint presentation that had some numbers on it. Well, it was a live PowerPoint presentation, and those numbers, if you were to double click on them, opened up an Excel spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet was tied, it had everybody's pay rate, and then also had green, yellow, and red. They were going to do a big layoff. Wow. And so everybody got a hold of it. And for one thing, the VP lost his job.
Yeah.
Right. But if you think about that now, I think it is important. I think there is a certain amount of it being healthy. If you knew of an impending sort of layoff, I think it behooves you from a company culture and from being graded, if you will, to be transparent.
Oh yeah, I agree.
It just makes more sense.
I mean, we used to do annual reviews. That is such a waste. An annual review makes no sense of the speed business moves these days. You should be talking to your employees every month about how they're doing and towards, again, what's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? People should be getting much more frequent updates. It's not once a year. And I agree with you. If you have some kind of a back plan that says, look, if we have to cut costs, these are the people most susceptible, those people should know they're susceptible. Because if then they should be reassessing, is this where I want to work? Why would I be on that? Well, because they don't value marketing here as much as they value engineering. So maybe I should go to an organization where that's different, right? Or they don't value the type of engineering I do compared to another type of engineering, or they don't value operational improvement. So you should know that. You should be clear. And that's what these Gen Z people are saying is give me clarity around my pay, give me clarity around my work environment, give me clarity around how I can be promoted, how I can improve, how I can go forward, and how I can be mentored. The another one that's really big for Zoomers is the flexibility. Again, they want to work from home. They want 4-day work weeks. This is why we can predict it so accurately. I mean, if you get to where you have two generations saying this is what they want, it will happen, right? It will happen. And if you fight it, you're just going to lose the best people to the early adopters that go that direction. But they specifically want mental health care. They specifically call out asking for mental health care. And I think that's, again, it's tremendous because you and I, when we work in our careers, if we got depressed or if we thought that things were tough or we needed a break, we were considered a pansy, right? And you just didn't talk about that kind of thing. And you couldn't say, gee, my wife had a heart attack or I have a son that was in a car wreck and he broke his back. And they'd be like, okay, take 2 days off. I mean, every company I ever knew actually had a policy for how many days you could take off if your wife died or your husband died or if one of your children died. They had a policy. You get 5 days off if a kid dies. I'm like, that's crazy. Huh? You should, every person's individual. So
Yeah, that brings me to something else before we close out here is that, when I became a manager way back in, I would say the mid 2000s, there was a book I read called First Break All the Rules. That was a management book that kind of reframed the way I thought. And it had to do with when you manage people, not to manage everybody with the same exact set of tools or rules, but with a certain amount of flexibility so that you, if I were to be managing somebody in their 60s, like I did that first guy, I'm going to treat them a little bit differently than somebody who's in their 20s or 30s. And it has nothing to do with, these policies. I mean, there's got to be policies on certain amount of fairness, but just how you interact with them makes a big difference.
So I'll tie up some of the learnings here. The end of this was what do Zoomers really value? A commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. 77% have physically involved themselves in a Black American Equality Project like Black Lives Matter. 77%. They really do believe in inclusion. They do believe in fairness and accountability on environment, sustainability, and social responsibility, or ESG again, back towards the end. I think this gives some practical ideas that our leaders out there should be thinking about. If you're going to go out and build a workforce, whether they're direct employees or they're gig workers or they're part-time employees, if you get a hold of these thoughts and you build your organization around them, your opportunity for success increases dramatically. So don't look to the past, don't look to the boomers, and don't watch CNN or Fox and expect them to tell you how to be a good leader. Look at the people of the millennials and the Gen Zs.
Very well said, Adam. With that, we'll talk to you guys next week, and we'll have some more insights on how to use trends to grow your business. A lot of this is just opening your eyes to what's happening around you, and of course, listening to the Business Trendsetter podcast. Talk to you later.